Hello guys, it's Matt Broomfield. You get to see me in the flesh for a change. So what I thought I'd talk about today was the pros and cons of using a resin printer for 3D printing your DAZ or Poser models. There are lots of good reasons to use a resin printer over an FDM printer such as an Ender or a Guider or something like that. But there are also some minuses. I think that the pros massively outweigh the minuses, but I just thought I'd go over some today. Now I've got a list here because I've got a terrible memory, so I'll be referring to that, and I've got lots of samples here to show you. So I basically over Christmas bought two printers. I bought an Elegoo Saturn II, and I also bought a Bamboo Labs Carbon X1 to add to my Guider 2 and my Ender S Pro or whatever it was. I personally would never buy another Ender, but the Guider was a really great printer, large format semi-pro printer. But I was ready to move up. What I liked about the Carbon was that it printed colour. That was the number one thing. But also it had lots of technology that made printing very easy, that auto bed levelling and LiDAR, print measurement and stuff like that. But I also bought, as I said, an Elegoo Saturn II, which is an 8K resin printer, and I had different things in mind for them. To be honest, I was more interested in the Carbon, but I've been very impressed with the Elegoo, which I only just really started using for the last week or two. So let me just go over some of the different things. So what I have here are some various models that I printed. So this, first of all, I'm going to show this to the camera. I have a small camera over here. Hopefully I'll cut this in. This little model here, which actually was a failure, it took over 12 hours to reach that point, but is I believe that's 9 colours printed there. Had it finished it would have been great, but I think in retrospect I'd print it larger. But this was an FDM Carbon X1 print, and then this here is printed with the Saturn II. It's a frieze of Leonardo da Vinci. But what you're going to be most interested in, I suspect, are these models here. I hope that these are both working, but these two are both printed with resin, and this is printed with an FDM printer. And I would have to say straight away, this probably weighs a third as much as that, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So so the resin prints here, the FDM print here. So what I have is a 1 to 11 list pros and cons. So first of all, the resin printers print a much higher resolution. Print resolution is measured in fractions of a millimetre, and a standard FDM printer such as an Ender or what's the one that everybody uses, the I can't remember the name. Poser, which is a very reliable printer. A Poser prints, say, on average a level height of 0.2 mils, and it can go down as low as, I believe, 0.08, something like that, I don't know, of a mil, and that's every layer. So FDM printers build up, they squirt resin in a circle, or in a, whatever shape, and think of it like toothpaste coming out of a tube, and the toothpaste is basically as little as 0.08 of a millimetre, although more likely to be 0.2 or even 0.4 of a millimetre thick. And then it builds up by putting layers like squirty bricks on top of each other. And that's a very different process to how a resin printer works, and I was quite surprised by how very different the resin prints were. The resin print is still an additive print, which is to say that you print a layer, then you print another layer on top, and that's still like bricks, but rather than having a head that moves around and deposits lines that outline the shape, you have a screen, basically an LCD screen, and the screen exposes itself or shines onto a vat of resin, and wherever the screen shines, the resin underneath hardens, just a tiny thinness of it, and so the entire size of the screen gets exposed simultaneously. So that means that there's no cost if you choose to have multiple models on a single bed or just one. It's no quicker or slower to have multiples. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As I said, with the resolution of the models here, I'll just put those over here. The FDM printer, such as the Poser, or the new Carbonex one that I have, or the P1P, typically speaking, they wouldn't go down much below 0.08, 0.05, something like that. Whereas the resin printer, the standard resolution for that is 0.05, and it can go an awful lot lower than that. So what that means is that the amount of detail on the resin printer is much, much finer. And you might think, well, with an FDM printer, the finer the detail, the slower the print. But with a resin printer, that is also true. But because it starts at a much finer layer height to start with, you can actually print much quicker on a resin printer at a finer resolution than you can on an FDM printer. Now, obviously, when you're printing a figure, what you're looking for here, this is my little scribe that I use for cleaning up models. What you're looking for is as much detail as possible. So this is a woman that I exported from DAZ, and if you look here, you'll see she's got little tiny fingers here, little tiny hands. She's what, about maybe 6 centimeters high, and down here, these little tiny finger details and the ripples in her skirt all show up beautifully, because on a resin printer these parts don't snap off very easily, whereas if you look at this print from an FDM printer, see her entire arm is snapped off, fingers missing here, I think her legs are a bit wonky, her toes may have snapped off. So, and if you look at the hair, look here, they're both exactly the same model, but the hair here, you can see it's an actual DAZ hair model that tumbles down over her shoulders, whereas here the hair is completely snapped off. So what happened was, to be able to reach overhanging parts, it prints what's known as support, and the support comes up underneath the hair, and then the hair is just a mess of billboards basically, and then when you snap the support off, it snaps the billboard hair off, if it can even print that fine in the first place. Whereas here, what happens is the model prints upside down like this, and there's nothing touching this hair to make it work. It prints from this side, goes print, 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 print down here, and the hair is printing below this torso here, and so it has a much greater chance of printing DAZ hair figures straight out of the box without having to model something to compensate for this hair effect here. And I'll show you what I mean here as well. Here's a figure that I've made. It was made with 3D the figure is for a story I wrote, but this figure here, the kind of yellowy looking one, was made with resin, 3D Jake resin, which they insisted was grey. It's not, don't buy 3D Jake resin. But because it was printed on the resin printer, look at the hair. See, the hairs, you can actually see the hairstyle. Whereas with this, oops, amazing, with this one, when I printed the hairstyle, the hair just snapped off every time. So I had to model the hair in 3D Studio Max, which was far from ideal because that's not a very realistic hairstyle. So also this print probably weighs, I don't know, half a pound, and this one weighs again a fraction of that. So I'll just tuck those out of the way at the moment. So one of the problems, actually I'm just going to come back to this one. And you can't see the detail very well. One of the problems with DAZ models, and I mean they do what they're supposed to do, but the trouble is that what they're supposed to do is not 3D print. And so what you'll see, if I can zoom this right into the camera, oh, it'll be out of focus. Look at her face here. There's very, very little detail on the face here. And the reason is because the model is designed in DAZ for the texture to imply the detail. So just the same as with game models, when you have a game model, it's not a very high polygon model, but the texture comes from baking in the texture. On DAZ and Poser, you don't bake the textures in, but you could have a 4K texture on her face here, which would make that look very detailed. But without the texture, all you have is the polygons that make up the face, and the polygons are not very high. If you compare that to, I don't have any examples here, but if you were to compare that to, well, even this model here, which was designed for printing, then the detail on this model is a lot higher than the face detail on this model. So that is a flaw in the way that, well, it's not a flaw, it's the way that the figures were designed, and what they were designed for is not 3D printing. So another great thing about a very high resolution is that obviously these figures look great, although there's a weird thing here. This is an FDM issue, the way it sliced it. If you can see here, see on his leg, there's a kind of a split there, and that split is caused by the way that the slicer software prepared this. And if I show you the one that was prepared in Box, which is a Resin software, you will see there's no split on that leg. But another advantage of high resolution, of course, is that you can print things much smaller. So this figure is about 6 inches tall, and if I were to go down very, very small, the FDM printer, the detail really starts to fall. So this cat is, it's the Creality Lucky Cat here, and it's actually got quite a lot of detail on, a lot of fur detail and stuff down here, like little stripes scratched into it, and you can't see any of those. Maybe some just about on the back. But here, this is about 1 centimetre in size, a little slug, and it's printed perfectly. You can see all the tiny detail on the back of the skin here. You can see the little antenna here. So even if you just want to go smaller, and obviously if you're printing models for role-playing games, for example, then you may wish to go tabletop size. And even this figure here, you can see this colour figure here. Well, I guess, you know, I've gone pretty small, but you can see that the detail's starting to fall apart here, this Bamboo Labs one. So if you want detail or small size, then obviously the resin printer's the way to go. Now, here's a big problem. I'm going to go back to this woman again. This is my FDM printer, and in Poser, this item of clothing, this skirt, and I'll show it on the screen, but this skirt is a single-sided polygon, which is to say that it's basically paper thin. It has no thickness at all, in fact, and most Poser clothes are modelled like that. They rather than having dimension to them and X and Y, they're just draped, you know, imagine them as being a very thin piece of silk. And what happens is when the slicer software slices this up, where it's very, very thin, you'll get what's known as a manifold edge error, or a manifold error. Different software reports it different ways, and it can cause print problems where you lose details. I've just spilled tea everywhere. Okay, I'm just going to go and get a cloth. I won't be a second, guys. So what you can end up with is problems with clothing here, where the clothing doesn't render properly. Just the same as we had with the hair, you can get clothing snapping, and if you compare that to this figure, you'll see that the skirt is actually, appears to be, shorter on this figure, on this one, the FDM one. And the reason is probably because when it printed this figure on the bed, it printed support material that came up underneath here, and then when the support snapped off, it took the bottom rim of the dress off, or maybe, I don't know. But you can certainly see on the resin print that without any extra preparation except allowing the software to do its manifold fixing, which did take an inordinately large amount of time. I was using Box software for this, but when it had done, this printed really beautifully. So if you're having trouble with clothing, or you're going, you know, obviously you're going to want to print clothed figures, then resin gives you a much higher possibility of success. Okay, so here's another really important one. I've talked about supports on numerous occasions now, and I want to show you something else that's really great. So unfortunately I didn't print an FDM model to compare against, but with FDM printing, this is a figure standing here, and all of this stuff here is support. This is a resin. But if it was FDM, these points of contact are much bigger. So when you then, so this printed that way up on the printer, upside down, and when you come to snap these supports off, they leave little marks on the surface of the figure, which if you're used to 3D printing, you'll know cleaning those up can be a pain. So you will often orient models to try and minimise these supports, especially with an FDM printer where the residue on the model will be quite severe. Now I printed this, I oriented this so that the hair had the best chance of printing, just to show it off. But on the resin prints, these contact points are very, very small. They come to a little point, and it doesn't support in the same way as a FDM print. You'll see actually for some reason this support was not completed here, and so his foot's gone weird. But with these, this is cured, so there's 3 stages to printing. You print, then you take it out of the resin and put it into a resin vat, into a cleaning vat, which is isopropyl alcohol, and then once it's cleaned off, which takes a few minutes, then you put it into a curing vat, which twists it round on a table and shows ultraviolet light, which makes the resin go harder. So here, hopefully, I can demonstrate how easily that came off. Now if you're used to FDM printing, look, all of it is a little tiny bit there. This is where this little pit comes in, little tiny bit there, and that's it. That came off virtually in one piece, and this is not anything special. I just prepared this model. I just took a chance because I wanted to show you something with support on. So that look how beautiful that model is. How beautifully it cleaned up. I'm going to call him Peg Leg Pete. He was supposed to be standing here looking all tough and hard, but he's broken. Might drink that. Oh, he's drunk. Okay, so the ease of removing supports is not to be underrated. It's okay. There's something really weird happened to his neck here. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know what the hell's happened there. I might look at the model later. But the ease of removing supports is not to be underrated. That makes a massive difference in the quality of your models and the amount of cleanup. So looking at Peg Leg Pete here, notwithstanding the fact that he's got a Cardassian neck, I would say that you could almost paint that model without having to clean it up. It's actually quite remarkable how well it's cleaned up. I don't know if you can see here, by the way. See, it's quite yellow on this side. I cured it for 10 minutes, and on the side where the support was, it's still quite white. Now, people say that you should remove the supports before curing, that they come off easier. Personally, I find that the supports are crispier once they're cured, but as you can see, there's an issue there. Okay, my camera's flicking at me. I don't know what A means. Right. Anyway, right, so the supports are a massive factor in terms of your final print quality. As I mentioned before, the finished prints are a lot harder. So I don't know if you can hear that. I've got a metal pick here. That really does feel quite solid. It's not quite stone, but it's a nice quality. Now here's an FDM version of the same thing. I don't know if you can just tell, a little bit more plasticky. But if I had, say, an Etsy shop and I was selling these on Etsy, these are going to make your customers a lot happier. these resin prints because they feel heavy in their hand. It feels like something quality. So I really like that about it. Now, I also like the fact that the software Sheety Box, although it's basic, there are actually far few stages, software stages involved in preparation. If I'm preparing an FDM model, I have to think about things like retraction speed, travel speed of the head temperature, all manner of things like that. Whereas with the resin, the thing I most need to worry about is the curing time. So on each level, when it cures, it will cure for an amount of time, maybe anywhere between a few seconds and 60 seconds. So generally the first layer you'd cure for say 40 seconds to make sure that's well adhered to the metal bed. And then after that I generally tend to cure about 2.5 seconds per layer. And that really is the primary setting that I need to worry about, and everything else is fairly automated apart from the supports. The auto supports in the software are a bit crappy, as you can tell by Peg Leg Pete being missing a foot, where the support probably just didn't print underneath it or it snapped off. Down here there was something went wrong with the support there, and most serious people suggest doing your own supports manually. I can't be bothered with that personally, but maybe I'm not serious. Okay, so as I mentioned, the entire bed prints a whole layer at a time. So although the actual print thickness is much finer, the overall print speed is massively much faster, unless you go very fine in much finer than I would ever need to go. With that Leonardo da Vinci figure here, I can't see layer lines in this, and this was printed at the default 0.05. So 0.05. So going 1/10 of that size, 10%, down to 0.005 for example, or 0.001. I don't see any benefit of that. But maybe if I was printing tiny tabletops and I was using 8K resin, then there might be some reason, but I doubt it. Speaking of 8K resin, with FDM printing, one of the massive benefits is that the filament, that's the printing material, is really quite cheap. You can buy it as cheap as £10 for a kilo, or even less in fact if you buy it in bulk. Whereas this resin, the average price is £30 a kilo. I bought some for 20 and it was okay, but I have an 8K printer, and if I want to get the full 8K value, which I don't really care about, but if I did, then 8K resin is £60–70 a bottle for a kilo. So absolutely ridiculously expensive. Also, there's a far smaller range of colours, and you can't print multicolour. There are some people hacking it and doing multicolour stripes, but it's really a bad idea. So with resin, you're pretty much stuck to a single colour, and then you paint them all single colour and you just use them as is. And the colours, very simple primaries: whites, greys, blacks, red, green, blue, and a bunch of transparent colours. Whereas with FDM filament, you get multicolour, you get rainbow colours, you can get carbon fibre for super strength. There is a strong resin, but again, £100 a bottle or something ridiculous, whereas carbon fibre, £20. Carbon fibre filament. So you're much more limited. That said, resin is much stronger straight out of the box and much more temperature resistant. So there's that to consider. Another great thing, as I said before, because it prints an entire bed at a time, there's no penalty for putting multiple models, no time penalty for printing multiple models on a single bed at a time. With FDM, supposing I put this figure, imagine this grey thing is my print bed, it's probably about twice the size actually of my print bed, but if I print that figure, let's say it takes 12 hours to print on an FDM, if I then say, okay, I want 2 of those, the time more than doubles, because each of those has to be individually printed, and there's travel time for the head in between them. Whereas with the resin printer, I could have 10 of those and the print time doesn't go up at all. It's the height of the print. In fact, on the resin printer, you tend to print things laying down because it prints the whole bed, so you get better economy of speed that way than making the bed have to go all that way up, if that makes any sense. Right, okay, now let's get on to the minuses. There are 11 minuses, but they're not going to be particularly time consuming. So number one, I've just said, it's a much more expensive because the resin's expensive. The printers are actually quite comparable. My Elegoo, which is down there, cost me 500 and something in a sale. It's a much messier process. Much messier. With an FDM printer, you just put a roll of filament in and the filament feeds into the printer and it prints, and then you get little squirts of spare filament at the end, and that's it. And you can just dispose of those in the bin. But with the resin, you've got a vat of resin. In fact, why don't I show you? So you have a vat of resin, and you can see here, this is a print head, and there's the resin there, and this print head moves up and down. But you can see here, every time you take this head off here to remove the model, the resin drips everywhere, and down there is like a just spare splashed resin, and that resin is not only is it toxic, but it's also corrosive on your skin. So what you find is if you don't wear gloves, then you end up getting a tiny bit, just even there, just a tiny bit on your fingers, and then you rub your eyes with the fingers that you've got it on, and then your eyelids are burning for hours, or you rub it somewhere else, you go to the toilet or something, whatever, which I have done, and then you'll be burning somewhere else for a while. So generally you wear rubber gloves when you clean up. You can't just flush it down the sink. Something else, it's very, very environmentally unfriendly. It doesn't biodegrade. You shouldn't pour it down the sink. It's poisonous as well. So there are whole lots of minuses with resin. It just means you've got to think about how you dispose of it. That said, one of the things that you can do is, if you've got any spare resin, is just the resin degrades in that vat each time you use it, and all you just do is just pour it on a bowl or something, take it outside, show it to the sunlight, and within a few minutes it goes completely hard, and then you can dispose of it just like a piece of plastic or something in the rubbish. I mean, okay. The preparation process is a little bit more complicated. There's more stages. As I said, you can't print multicolour. Oh, it's something else that can be a bit of a problem. Yeah, I don't know if you can see this. Let me show it to this one. See, that's not laying flat on the surface. It's kind of warped. And so I printed that this way up. So came down off the bed like that. But it's kind of sagged under its own weight, which is annoying. And I don't know if you can see, there's like a fine pin cushion thing there where all the supports were. I possibly could have improved the support density. To be honest, generally speaking, with resin prints, you don't print flat on the bed like you would with an FDM. So with an ender, this would be the print bed, and it would print upwards off the bed, and that surface here would be completely flat, which I can demonstrate here. So here's one that I printed on an FDM. You can see that's perfectly flat. Same figure with resin, not flat. So but they say it's bad form to print directly off the bed with a resin printer because it's hard to get off the bed and you can damage your bed. Something like this, I would have just in future I'd just print that off the bed and then just scrape it off with a scraper. And that would have made that surface flat, and it didn't need support anyway. But generally speaking, if you're printing something like this, you wouldn't put it flat on the bed. You kind of do it at an angle off the bed, and then it just prints better and releases better. Another limitation, although I don't think it's going to be a limitation for Poser people is that you can't print as big on a resin printer. This one here is, I don't know what it is, I'm going to say 10 inches, but whatever it is, it doesn't matter, I'll put the specs up in a minute. But, you know, FDM printers are getting, you know, crazy big, and even an average one can print almost a foot by foot by foot. Whereas resin printers tend not to be, but then you're generally printing figures maybe for models or for, you know, for little statues to put on the side of, you know, on your shelf or whatever. So here, for example, this is an FDM print. This is what's this? Ugolino and his Sons. No, it's not. It's so I can't remember the name of it, but it's yeah, let's see if it's written on it. I think it actually says it on the plinth somewhere. Doesn't matter. Some famous Greek sculpture depicting the death of one of the Trojan priests and his sons. They're getting eaten by snakes. It's quite a famous sculpture, and I love it. And you know, this is what, 9 inches probably. That's not exceptionally big for an FDM print, and you often see people doing, you know, great big helmets and stuff like that. But for a resin print, that would be a fairly big and fairly expensive. That would probably cost me £30 to print, whereas for an FDM that's cost maybe £10 or £15, not even, probably half that. But as I said, you can do colour. This is in 2 parts. This is a Jean-Luc card. This was printed with the Bamboo Labs, and this was a single print in multiple colour. Yeah. So over here you can see this had 3 different filaments loaded in at once, and it divided the colours up. You can't do that with resin. Okay. Because it's a 3-stage process of printing, the print, the wash and the cure, generally people have like a curing station, and it obviously it takes up 3 times as much space. The resin printers, as I said, are smaller, but you know, if you have three equivalent units next to each other, one with isopropyl, the printer, and one photo curing station, that's a lot more space. Oh, here's another full colour print that I did. I didn't design it, I got it off Thingiverse and just printed that in one go. And finally, they tend to use proprietary software. They use most of them use a piece of software called Chitubox. So with my guider, that also uses proprietary software, but I can also download pre-sliced models from other pieces of software. I've forgotten the name of the software now that everybody uses, but it's you know, there are lots of royalty-free open source bits of software for FDM printers, and the resin printers tend to be locked into a proprietary software, and although that software comes with it, the big concern is that you know, Chitu does a free and a professional version, and the big concern is that one day that Chitu is just going to start charging for every version, and you'll be locked in. You won't be able to change the software you use for the printer because the hardware also is designed to use that. I have heard of some printers that you can download pre-sliced models. In fact, maybe mine can, I don't know. But I don't like proprietary software if possible. There you go. Anyway, look, although I mentioned some minuses, for figure printing, especially for Poser figure printing, I think it makes an awful lot of sense to go with a resin printer over an FDM printer. As I said, there are some minuses in terms of the messiness of the process, and that was the one thing that I was really fearful of. But at the end of it, it really wasn't that messy. It wasn't that complicated. It was I was afraid of it being far more complicated than it turned out to be. So don't let that put you off. So long as you've got the space to have the printer and the clean and wash and curing stations, then don't let the extra stages put you off, because they're really not that complicated. I'll give an example. So just imagine I've just done a print. I lift the lid off, I unscrew the plate, turn the model upside down and grab the basket out of the bath station. Then I scrape the model and it falls off into the basket. Put the scraper somewhere safe so that it doesn't leak resin everywhere. Then I take the basket, put it into the isopropyl alcohol, dial the amount of time I want it to cure, 5 minutes say, press the button, 5 minutes. 5 minutes later it beeps at me, then I come back, I lift the basket up, it's safe to touch the model now, so the toxic resin is gone, you know, it's clean. Now I pick the model up with my bare hands, lift the lid off the curing station, put the model on the curing station, which has a rotating bed. Then I dial in the amount of time, 5 to 20 minutes, press the button, whoop, and then it beeps when it's done. Really not that difficult to do. Don't let the process put you off doing it. So that's it really, guys. I hope that has made a case for why Poser and DAZ people might want to consider using a resin printer as opposed to an FDM. I was gonna opine whether or not it's better to have an FDM as your first printer to understand the process, but I really don't think that it is particularly. You know, you can print these, you can paint these prints, or you can just get, so this model for example here, these, I like to work with grey, but this has come a bit shiny because grey is just a lot easier to see. You can see in the light there, it's a lot easier to see the detail. This was supposed to be grey, as I say, but 3D Jake sent me the wrong stuff and then never admitted that they did. So, but this is very matte. This would paint very, very easily if I wanted a better finish, if I wanted to do something clever with it, you know, paint it skin colour or whatever. I've not got into model painting yet, I'll be honest. But you can see the beautiful detail in that. So one more thing, I'm just going to quickly show you this. One thing that I love about FDM printing, and I will make a video on the advantage of FDM printers, this is a little Creality cap. If I turn this torch on, okay, I'm probably blowing out the lens over there, am I? Right, and now can you see it's glowing green? So to my knowledge there's no luminous resin, but that little luminous cap is just an example of the better filaments, better print materials that you can get with resin. I think possibly they will eventually come up with better stuff. I've seen a lot of channels messing around with things in suspension, glitter and things like that, which seem to work just fine. I've not got to that stage yet, as I say, I've only had it a couple of weeks, but I just wanted to share my experience with you. I hope it was useful, guys, and you take care.